Order. We'll begin daily routine. Presenting and reading of petitions. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table several petitions on behalf of the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union with regards to the 1% contribution rate increase for public service pension plan, and the operative clause being, therefore be it resolved that we, the undersigned, call on the Ham government to withdraw clause 46 of Bill 62 in favour of an extensive round of discussions with the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union and QB that will conclude by the end of 2004 about long-term solutions to the funding problems of the plan and the possibility of joint governance of trusteeship. And I realize the Minister has made a statement on this issue, but I feel it's important to put this on the public record. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of Erla Cook of Isaacs Harbour and Chris Parsons of Port Beckerton in Guysborough County. And they have been involved in a clinical study at the Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Centre for their Fabry's disease. And Mr. Chairman, the operative clause reads, the cost of the treatment is approximately $275,000 per person. Right now, this cost is not covered by the provincial government, so they are asking that government review this and pay the cost. They've also it says June 30th here, Mr. Speaker, but as of a week or so, the provincial government has extended this until August the 30th for the use of this drug as a clinical study. And we're working on the cost of it.
And you'll fix your name.
I have affixed my name to this petition, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The petition will be tabled. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a petition. It reads as follows. We, the residents of Porters Lake and area, petition the Government of Nova Scotia to have O'Connell Drive, Porters Lake, between the No. 7 Highway and O'Connell Drive School, properly repaired and kept in good condition at all times. This road is subject to high volumes of traffic because of the school, resulting in a large number of potholes and at times almost impassable. Mr. Speaker, there's 158 signatures on this, and I've fixed my name to the petition as well.
Petition will be tabled. Presenting reports for committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wayne Barrett, the principal of Cobequid Education Centre, which is Nova Scotia's largest high school, will retire at the end of this academic year. And whereas Wayne Barrett joined the CEC teaching staff in 1994, became vice principal in 1974, became vice principal in 1994, and principal in 1998. And whereas Wayne Barrett has been a true champion of both the academic and co-curricular activities of CCEC and its student body, he is a faculty member who has been actively involved in some extracurricular activities and a strong supporter of most others. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate and thank Wayne Barrett for his 30 years of exemplary contribution to CEC students and his 33 years to education in Nova Scotia, and extend to him and his wife Nancy best wishes for the future. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Is it agreed? Agreed. Any other further statement, government notice of motions? Introduction of bills. Introduction of bills. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism fills positions that otherwise could not exist, and whereas there can never be too many to help deliver health care services, and whereas on Volunteer Awards Night, April 21st, 2004, Ms. Sonia Ferguson was honored by the Municipality of East Hants for her work at the Rawdon Hills Health Centre. Therefore, be it resolved this House of Assembly congratulate Ms. Sonia Ferguson for her fine example of contributing to the betterment of her community. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request is for Is it agreed? No. All in favor say aye. Motion carried. Honourable member, Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas there was once a time when the member for the Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley tried to revolt against the leader of the Tory party, but he failed in his attempt. And whereas the member was rewarded for his actions by never being allowed a peek in the cabinet room, and whereas once again this member is not towing the party line with regard to gas prices. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House recognize that the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley is providing more effective opposition than the NDP.
Motion is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the former federal Liberal minister, Robert Thibault, was right there to cut the ribbon when HRDC announced project funding for the new Tri-County Women's Centre in 2002, and whereas the former minister was nowhere to be seen when the grant ran out and the centre was facing closure in 2003, and whereas the MLA for Yarmouth stepped in and advocated for provincial support from the Department of Community Services, which saved the Tri-County Women's Centre. Therefore, be it resolved that when the member for Halifax-Clayton Park tried to claim credit for the federal Liberals' role in this saga yesterday, she should have acknowledged the true commitment of her federal cousins in being prepared to allow the Tri-County Women's Centre to close. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
There's been a request for a waiver. Is that agreed? I hear some no's. The Honourable Leader of the NDP.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the St. FX Extension Department will be holding its 18th Topshee Memorial Conference on May 15th and 16th, 2004, and whereas the Topshee Conference has been held since 1984 to honor the memory of Reverend George Topshee, and whereas these conferences enable individuals and community-based groups to seek solutions to common issues from a social justice perspective, carrying on the spirit of the Antigonish movement. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognizes that the contribution made by the Topshee Memorial Fund, initiated by the Atlantic Federations of Labour, and extends best wishes to the delegates who will address this year's theme, People's Globalization, the World We Want. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying nay. Contrary minded? Motion's carried. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 2nd, 2004, the YWCA will hold their Women's Recognition Event Luncheon to honour women or make a difference in our community, women of vision. And whereas Nina Adams of East Preston is being honoured in the category of Neighbourhood Legends, changing our communities through volunteering. And whereas Opal Kane of Dartmouth is being honoured in the category of Workplace Innovation, changing how we work. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House congratulate Nina Adams and Opal Kane and commend them to their devotion to their work in their community. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. Contrary minded? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kinney and Ross Limited from Port Saxon, Shelburne County, was recognized last night at the Export Achievement Awards dinner, and whereas Kinney and Ross have had tremendous success in their exporting business and were honored in association with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters for their contribution to Nova Scotia's economy, and whereas Mr. Robert Wellen, Vice President of Kinney and Ross Limited, was one of the company's personnel on hand last night to accept the award. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs pay tribute to Kinney and Ross Limited of Port Saxon, Shelburne County for their outstanding work and the jobs which accompany this outstanding work in Shelburne County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion's carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Chebucto Head Light has welcomed and warned generations of mariners entering Halifax Harbour, and whereas the Chebucto Head Light Station and Keeper's House have now been abandoned by the Department of Fisheries Oceans and are being vandalised, and whereas the Chebucto Head Light Community Group has negotiated a lease to allow them to repair and to use the lighthouse as an interpretation centre, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate Dr. Annalise Chapman and the Chebucto Head Light Group on this news in their efforts to increase awareness of the light station's history and the fragile coastal barrens behind them. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour signify by saying aye? Contrary minded, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the member from Cape Breton Nova says he is concerned about the loss of teaching positions at the Cape Breton Victoria Board, and whereas this year's provincial budget contained no new money for school boards with declining enrolments, like the Cape Breton Victoria Board, and whereas the member from Cape Breton Nova voted in favour of the budget, therefore be it be resolved that the member from Cape Breton Nova recognize that the Cape Breton Victoria School Board is short of money because of a budget that he and the NDP caucus supported, a budget which is hurting our public education system. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It's not agreed. I hear nays. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Mr. Speaker, I can't hear.
Order. The honourable member for Kings North has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day that I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a grade 12 student at Northeast Kings.
Order. The honourable member for Kings North, would you please start again?
Resolution. Whereas a grade 12 student at Northeast Kings Education Centre has received a $5,000 scholarship from Toyota to help pay for his post-secondary education, and whereas Evan Warner spends his summers working at Sunship Earth Environmental Camp in Windsor and received the scholarship for his environmental leadership, and whereas the Canning student will use the money to attend the film program at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Evan Warner on winning a scholarship from Toyota and wish him much success at Simon Fraser's University School Board. I request waiver.
Well, I didn't hear a word you said, member, but I'm sure it was a very good resolution. There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? It's agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, June 6, 2004, at 1900 hours, Branch 128 Whitney Pier Royal Canadian Legion and the Whitney Pier Memorial Junior High School will commemorate the 60th anniversary of D-Day, and whereas 60 candles will be lit to mark the anniversary of Allied landing in Normandy during the Second World War, and whereas we must encourage young and old alike to remember the contributions made by members of our community to the war effort. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly congratulate Branch 128 Whitney Pier Legion for their initiative and tireless effort in remembering those who sacrificed their lives of freedom and those who continue to fight for veterans of today. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas yesterday the government, in order to alleviate intolerable wait lists, announced $300,000 in funding in order to assist in the provision of rehabilitation services for children at the IWK. Whereas the Premier commented that his government's delay in responding to the crisis was because his government is not interested in participating in programs they can't sustain and the federal government hasn't provided enough funding. And whereas last year's $155 rebate checks would have sustained the $300,000 a year funding for additional rehabilitation services for some 240 years. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize that it is priorities, not sustainability and lack of funding, that has allowed wait lists for rehabilitation services to grow at the IWK. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear nays. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 75th birthday is a date that should not go unrecognized, and whereas Vera M. McGregor celebrated this milestone on April the 8th of this year, and whereas Mrs. McGregor makes her home in the Hit of Jador, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House extend their heartfelt congratulations and best wishes to Vera M. McGregor on the occasion of her 75th birthday. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver has been asked for. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the St. Margaret's Bay Lions Club recently announced its awards at its annual charter night, whereas Lions Carlos Duque Carvelo and Beatrice Brushett were named as the Lion of the Year and Rookie of the Year, respectively, and whereas these Lions and members of the St. Margaret's Bay Lions continue to put into action the Lions' motto of "We Serve," therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Beatrice Brushett and Carlos Duque Carvelo on being awarded Rookie of the Year and Lion of the Year by the St. Margaret's Bay Lions Club. I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Mainland North Volunteer Recognition Committee held its first volunteer recognition May 6, 2004 to honor volunteers who've made a difference in their community, and whereas Karen Robinson has worked for over 10 years to ensure a safe and healthy environment in our schools as a founding member and president of Citizens for a Safe Learning Environment, and whereas Ms. Robinson has averaged 25 hours volunteering a week, all the while battling a health disability which limits her activities and also raising her 2 children, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House acknowledge the tremendous efforts Karen Robinson has made to make our schools a safer place and congratulate her for receiving the Mainland North Volunteer Recognition Award. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice. Thank you, and passage without debate.
For waiver, is it agreed? It's agreed. With all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ron Fielding was named to the Honour Roll of the Truro Sport Heritage Society for Excellence in Hockey. Whereas Ron Fielding, following an outstanding career as a minor hockey player, was a member of the 49-50 and 50-51 Halifax St. Mary's Junior team, which won the Maritime Junior title and competed in the Memorial Cup playdowns. And whereas Ron Fielding played senior hockey in the APC League for 3 years, and in the 1953-54 season set a league record by scoring 43 goals and was selected to the All-Star team. Therefore be resolved that this House congratulates Ron Fielding for being named to the Honour Roll of the Truro Sport Heritage Society and wish him and his wife Lois health and happiness in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism is the plug that fills the holes in society that otherwise would leave us all poor in spirit and prosperity. Whereas volunteering to work with hospitalized children to ease their time of suffering is a mark of a generous spirit, and whereas on Volunteer Awards night, April 21st, 2004, Ms. Kathy Blois was honored by the municipality of East Hants for her work at the IWK Health Centre. Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Kathy Blois for her outstanding example of selflessness and caring for those most vulnerable and most precious. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and pass it out debate.
And a request for waiver, is it agreed? It's agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the tabling yesterday of a letter written by his finance minister to the federal minister of finance appeared to have caught the premier by surprise, even though he had been copied on that letter, and presumably the minister of finance would not have sent such a directive to Ottawa without his prior approval. Whereas the premier insisted that he was in favor of getting cost-sharing dollars from Ottawa, even though he was holding in his hand a copy of the letter that said otherwise. And whereas it is becoming painfully clear that the Premier is not being properly briefed by his army of communications advisors, therefore be it resolved that the Premier insists that his Director of Communications and his Chief of Staff stop screening his mail, permit him to read letters that are copied to him, and allow him to sit in on all Cabinet meetings, even the ones where issues of substance are discussed. And I would ask for waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? I hear nays. Motion is tabled. The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas high school sports are so important to school morale, and whereas a large number of students are provided with the opportunity to participate in a variety of school sports, and whereas Bridgewater High School hosted and participated in the 2004 Division III Provincial Hockey Championships. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate the Bridgewater High School hockey players and coaching staff for not only hosting the event, but winning the silver medal at the competition. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? It's agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded? Motion's carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Tory government has seen fit to allow for 48 hours notice before there is a gasoline price increase, but not if the price goes down. And whereas the leader of the NDP thought it was such a great idea, he suggested that today's families could implement a 48-hour budget. And whereas maybe the 48-hour rule could be used in the House to notify the government of their potential demise. Therefore, be it resolved that the NDP should give 48 hours notice. Mr. Speaker, therefore be it resolved that the NDP should give 48 hours notice before propping up a government, but no such requirement will be made if they finally agree to defeat them. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
I hear nays. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ridgecliffe Middle School is planning a night of art and fashion as a fundraiser for the Fine Arts program and the Teen Health Center at that school. Whereas students from the art program will have their artwork on display. Whereas students will also present a fashion show in modeling their own creations made from recycled materials. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly extend its best wishes to the organizers and students of Ridgecliffe on their Night of Art and Fashion fundraiser. I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request has been for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded? Motion is carried. Oh, the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you revert to the order of business tabling of bills? Or introduction of bills.
It's a request to revert to business tabling of bills. Introduction of bills is agreed. It's agreed. The honourable member for Victoria of the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 199 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Heritage Property Act.
Bill has been introduced by the member for Victoria of the Lakes, an act to amend Chapter 199 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Heritage Property Act.
Give him a copy.
Bill 81, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 199 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Heritage Property Act.
Order this bill be read a second time. Okay, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for third reading?
Public bills for third reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 49, the Mi'kmaq Education Act?
Bill number 49, the Mi'kmaq Education Act. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Absolutely. It's only 15 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to review the amendments we propose for the Mi'kmaq Education Act. It acknowledges First Nation communities in Nova Scotia that have autonomy from the federal government to deliver their own educational programs for their learners. And it also requires that these programs be comparable to those offered in Nova Scotia's public schools so that students can transfer back and forth. Bear River First Nation is taking the initiative to attain autonomy for education for its community. The band requested this amendment so its autonomy is recognized by the provincial government. We're pleased to accommodate this request, and if there are no questions or further comments, I move third reading of this bill.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I glad to make a few comments, and I'll be brief. I certainly see this as a positive step. It would obviously make sense that this band would like to have their name added to the schedule. I still want to reiterate my comments in second reading, in particular to the minister, that presently only the education minister in British Columbia gathers detailed evidence on Aboriginal school outcomes, and I would say that there still is some work needs to be done in this area, and that the minister would be well advised to stay on top of this issue and ensure that that expected outcomes are the outcomes that we're getting. When the minister rises to close debate, I'd be curious to know that. When I looked at the original act, Mr. Speaker, that brought the other bands into this act, I was curious to find a power to amend the schedule, and which means, as I read it, that the governing council can amend the schedule, and they can add the name of any band to the schedule under the existing act, and so I was curious to see when I saw that the minister actually brought in this bill to add the Bear River Band to the schedule. So if the minister could give some brief explanation of why he did it in this way rather than by order in council, that's just a curiosity that I have. But I see this as a positive step. I encourage the minister to keep his attention close to the outcomes of students in schools on reserves in the province. Those communities want the same things for their children as all communities do, and I think, as being a former educator, I see education as a way to create options for students, and to have any mechanism that opens more doors rather than closes them is a good thing. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're very supportive of this legislation.
Thank you. Any further interventions? Then I'll recognize the Minister of Education closing.
I think that intervention, and I'm going to have to find the answer to that question for him, but I'm pleased to move third reading of Bill number 49.
For third reading, Bill number 49, is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay.
Is it carried? Motion.
Is it carried?
No.
Oh, sorry.
After. Just call it. Bill 49, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1998, the Mi'kmaq Education Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 50, the Credit Union Act?
Bill number 50, the Credit Union Act.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Environment and Labour, I move third reading of Bill number 50.
The question has been called for. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just want to rise for a few moments on this particular bill and say at the outset that how proud I am as an individual to be a longtime member of the Sydney Credit Union, 45 years actually, Mr. Speaker, and past president of that organization. And today, 1 in 4 people in industrial Cape Breton belong to a credit union. And that's significant and a departure from the traditional role in the past of credit unions always being thought of in our community and other communities across the province as perhaps a level below in terms of a financial institution than the banks. Well, you know, this bill helps to remind Nova Scotians of the importance of credit unions in Nova Scotia and the importance of the kind of a role they play in the community. And I, for one, want to congratulate the government for pushing this bill forward, and also to the members of the House for agreeing unanimously to support this bill. It's a bill whose time has come, and I believe it's one step further in this province to telling Nova Scotians of the vital role the credit unions play. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further interventions? I'll recognize the Government House Leader for closing.
Third reading of Bill number 50.
The motion is for third reading of Bill number 50. House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 50, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994, the Credit Union Act.
I order the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk, and order that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 51, the Provincial Acadian Day Act?
Bill number 51, the Provincial Acadian Day Act. I'll recognize the Minister responsible for Acadian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to stand in my place today and move third reading of Bill number 51, an act to establish an Acadian Provincial Day, or Provincial Acadian Day, la loi instituant la fête provinciale des Acadiens et des Acadiennes.
Recognize the leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise. I just want to say a few words on the third reading on Bill number 51, the Provincial Acadian Day Act. Monsieur le Président, ça fait longtemps que les Acadiens et les Acadiennes fêtent le 15 août. Je comprends que ça fait depuis 1881 qu'on célèbre notre fête nationale. Mr. Speaker, August 15 has been recognized since 1881 by Acadians as our national holiday, and today Acadians in our province are delighted to see that our provincial government recognizing August 15 as the Provincial Acadian Day. Cette année marque le 400e anniversaire de l'arrivée des Français en Amérique du Nord. En 1604, 400 ans passés, l'arrivée de Sieur de Demont et de Samuel de Champlain, accompagnés d'habitants français, débarqua sur les rives de la Nouvelle-Écosse. This year, Mr. Speaker, marks the 400th anniversary of the first French settlers in North America. Et aujourd'hui, les Acadiennes et les Acadiens de cette province se réjouissent de voir la province reconnaître la fête nationale des Acadiens le 15 août. La tenue du 3e Congrès mondial ici en Nouvelle-Écosse cet été invite à rappeler la naissance d'un petit peuple, celui des Acadiennes et des Acadiens. Monsieur le Président, ce petit peuple a une histoire, a un drapeau, un hymne national et a une fête nationale. Et j'encourage tous les Néo-Écossais de participer aux activités associées à ce grand événement culturel acadien cet été. This summer, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia will host an international gathering of the Acadians. Le Congrès mondial acadien will be held from July 31st to August 15th, and many events are planned to be held around the province. And I encourage all Nova Scotians to participate in this very special celebrations of Acadian culture. Monsieur le Président, je veux ajouter, avant de terminer, quelques mots pour reconnaître la personne responsable pour avoir fait la promotion d'auprès du gouvernement provincial du jour que la Nouvelle-Écosse soit hôte pour le 3e Congrès mondial cet été. Et, Monsieur le Président, cette personne est à l'ancien directeur exécutif du Bureau des affaires acadiennes, M. Paul Godet, de la Baie-Sainte-Marie. Je me souviens, avant la tenue du 2e Congrès des Acadiens en Louisiane en 1999, que M. Godet travaillait sur ce dossier et manqua jamais la chance à lobbyer le gouvernement provincial du jour, à appuyer ses efforts pour que la tenue du 3e Congrès mondial acadien soit ici en Nouvelle-Écosse en 2004. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize Paul Godet, former Executive Director of Acadian Affairs, as the person responsible for lobbying the provincial government of the day to support his efforts that Nova Scotia should host this international gathering of the Acadians this summer. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the member for Halifax Fairview.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je n'ai jamais eu auparavant l'occasion de parler français ici dans l'Assemblée législative et c'est ma première fois pour parler. Je suis souvent la porte-parole en langue française pour l'NPD. Ce n'est pas parce que je suis francophone, ce n'est pas parce que je suis acadien, mais c'est parce que je parle français mieux que tous les autres députés dans notre caucus. mais il y a parmi nous des députés qui parlent français aussi, comme le député de Sackville-Cobequid ou député de Halifax Atlantic. Et je sais que mon collègue, l'acadien dans notre caucus, M. Deveau, le membre de Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, veut améliorer son français et un peu redécouvrir son héritage acadien. Nous sommes fiers pour dire que nous donnons notre appui à ce projet de loi, mais il faut reconnaître que la seule chose que ce projet de loi fait, c'est de reconnaître la fête provinciale des Acadiens et des Acadiennes. Et c'est une étape importante pour cette Assemblée législative de reconnaître la fête provinciale. Mais comme nous avons entendu pendant la 12e lecture sur ce projet de loi, c'est seulement une première étape. Il y a des questions très importantes auxquelles nous devons faire face. Les députés de Richmond soulevaient des questions sur ce que nous faisons ici dans l'Assemblée législative. La question du drapeau acadien qu'on a hissé sur les terrains de l'Assemblée, mais c'est quelque chose de temporaire. Est-ce que ça peut être quelque chose de permanent? C'est une bonne question. Il a soulevé aussi la question de la traduction, que la traduction soit disponible ici dans l'Assemblée pour les députés qui veulent s'exprimer en français, dans leur langue maternelle. Notre communauté acadienne s'est adressée aux des questions surtout sur l'éducation. Nous avons le Conseil scolaire acadien provincial, mais j'ai lu hier, Monsieur le Président, que les Acadiens, la communauté acadienne, veut s'adresser maintenant aux questions de pouvoir s'exprimer en français dans le système de santé. Et ça, c'est une question aussi difficile et c'est une bonne question aussi. Est-ce que nous sommes prêts à s'adresser à de telles questions? Parce qu'il n'y a aucune question que livrer des services de santé en français va coûter. Ce n'est pas quelque chose qu'on peut livrer gratuitement. Est-ce que cette Assemblée législative est prête à aller plus loin que des mots, que des projets de loi, et accorder un budget afin que la communauté acadienne puisse recevoir des services de santé en français, tout comme ils reçoivent maintenant des services en éducation. Alors, ce projet de loi est une première étape, est une bonne première étape, et ça va recevoir l'appui unanime de cette Assemblée, j'en suis sûr, mais il y a d'autres questions plus difficiles auxquelles nous devons faire face. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Recognize the member for Richmond.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Ça me fait plaisir de dire quelques mots sur le projet de loi numéro 51 qui reconnaît la journée acadienne ici en Nouvelle-Écosse. Je n'avais pas l'intention de dire quelques mots du fait que mon chef, le député de Clare, s'avait déjà présenté, mais je voulais prendre cette occasion pour féliciter mon collègue de Halifax-Fairview pour s'avoir eu présenté ici à cette Assemblée aujourd'hui. J'ai vu qu'il n'avait pas de notes, qu'il a parlé juste lui-même de son cœur et de ses idées. Et je peux vous dire, la seule chose que j'en ai de regret, c'est que c'est juste aujourd'hui sa première fois qu'il s'est prononcé, parce que je l'encourage de se prononcer dans le futur en français, parce que, comme vous l'avez bien vu après que son discours, les membres ont très bien aimé la façon qu'il s'est présenté, les choses qu'il avait à dire et tout ça. Et puis, je suis content qu'il a soulevé des points que j'ai déjà soulevés ici à la maison. Et puis, c'est sans question, si on avait la traduction ici à l'Assemblée, que les députés qui ne sont pas confortables en français pouvaient entendre plus de français ici à l'Assemblée et avoir la traduction pour comprendre les mots, comprendre qu'est-ce que c'est qu'ils veulent dire. Je n'ai pas de doute qu'on aurait plus de députés qui voudraient avoir le courage de se présenter en français. Je m'en rappelle même, Monsieur le Président, que le ministre des Services communautaires, pas longtemps après qu'il a été élu, une journée, savait présenter lui-même en français, le député de King South, et j'étais bien content de l'entendre lui aussi faire ses efforts de se présenter en français, et puis je l'encourage qu'il fasse lui aussi dans plus dans le futur. Et si qu'on avait des services de traduction, c'est sans question, ce serait plus facile pour les députés d'avoir confiance de se présenter en français. Une chose que je peux vous dire, c'est souvent qu'on attend des gens qui nous disent « Ben, je ne suis pas trop confortable de me présenter en français, je pense pas que je prononce les mots très bien, il y a des mots que je connais pas. » Je peux vous dire, comme vous l'avez vu avec le député de Halifax-Fairview qui s'est très bien présenté, la communauté acadienne, la communauté française ici en Nouvelle-Écosse est toujours fière de voir quand leurs députés, spécialement leurs députés, veulent essayer au moins de se présenter en français, de dire quelques mots. En 2004, je pense que c'est quelque chose avec un pays qui est bilingue, que c'est toujours beau de voir des membres élus qui font un effort de vouloir se présenter en français et quand les Français peuvent se présenter en anglais. Alors, comme l'a déjà été dit des différents députés, ceci, ça va être une très grande année pour la communauté acadienne. Ce projet de loi est une étape pour la province à reconnaître le 15 août comme la journée du peuple acadien. J'encourage tous les députés de faire participation soit aux réunions de famille, soit aux différents événements qui vont prendre place dans les communautés, soit à Grand-Pré, soit ici à Halifax, soit au Cap-Breton cet été. C'est une été pour célébrer la communauté acadienne, pour célébrer l'Acadie, et j'encourage tous les membres de tous coins de la province de s'impliquer et de nous joindre en félicitant l'année de l'Acadie. Une chose qui a toujours été dit des Acadiens, c'est comment chaleureux qu'ils sont et comment ils sont toujours pour recevoir le peuple et d'avoir, bien plus important, un bon temps chaque fois qu'on se met ensemble. Alors, je vous encourage d'en profiter, de participer à ces événements et faire 2004 une année que pas juste la communauté acadienne peut être fière, mais toute la province de Nouvelle-Écosse peut être fière de notre héritage acadien et du peuple acadien et de la culture qui demeure très forte ici en Nouvelle-Écosse en 2004. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I'll recognize the member for Argyll and the minister responsible for Acadian Affairs for closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, j'apprécie les commentaires des membres de Clare, de Richmond, de Halifax-Fairview pour le travail à faire cette discussion en français. J'aimerais remercier la Fédération acadienne de Nouvelle-Écosse pour approcher le gouvernement pour demander cet honneur sera fait au peuple acadien. Et M. Stan Surratt qui a fait cette approche. J'aimerais aussi remercier Mme Von Madden, Ronald Bourgeois, qui ont fait beaucoup de travail pour faire certain que le Congrès mondial 2004 sera ici en Nouvelle-Écosse cette année. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to invite all of the members here in the House to participate in the activities of the Congrès mondial acadien 2004. It will be traveling the province, starting off in Clare, and I'm sure the member from Clare will be very busy during those few weeks. The member from Richmond will be very busy as well. He'll be moving to the middle show in Shetty Camp. I forget the exact date on that one. Anyway, it's the middle of the show. And of course, on the 15th of August, which is now going to be the Provincial Acadian Day for the finale here in Halifax, with the Mass, of course, in the afternoon in Grand Pré. So I invite everybody to participate and enjoy the family unions that will be happening. Mr. Speaker, I move third reading of Bill number 51, an act to establish the Provincial Acadian Day. Merci beaucoup.
For third reading of Bill 51. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 51, entitled an act to establish a Provincial Acadian Day, loi instituant la fête provinciale des Acadiens et des Acadiennes.
I order that the bill do pass, order that the title be as read by the clerk, and order that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 67, the House of Assembly Act?
Bill number 67, the House of Assembly Act.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Justice, I'm pleased to move third reading of Bill number 67.
The question has been called. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 67, entitled an act to amend, it should be, Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
I order that the bill do pass, order that the title be as read by the clerk, and order that the bill be engrossed. I'll recognize the government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 68, the International Interest in Mobile Aircraft Equipment Act?
Bill number 68, the International Interest in Mobile Aircraft Equipment Act. Question has been called. Yes.
Close the debate. Third reading, I should say. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move third reading of Bill number 68.
Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Bill is carried.
Bill 68, entitled an act to implement the Convention on International Interests in Mobile Equipment in matters specific to aircraft equipment.
I order that the bill do pass, order that the title be as read by the clerk, and order that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve us into a committee of the whole House on bills.
House recognizes the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 26, the Health Protection Act?
Bill number 26, Health Protection Act. An amended copy has been forwarded to all members of the House. Should be on your desk. Shall the clauses carry? Shall the title carry? The honourable member from Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my understanding that the Minister was prepared to entertain some amendments to this particular bill with some discussions that were taking place with his staff. It's my understanding that those were going to be dealt with at this point in time. And I'm curious whether the minister could advise the House on what the status of that is before we go any further with this bill, because certainly there were some amendments that had been discussed that weren't prepared yesterday by Ledge Council for dealing at law amendments. So if the minister could advise before I continue my remarks.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, there was an understanding that if the amendments were ready today, that we would be prepared to try and fit them in. However, I had a discussion with the Legislative Council coming into the chamber this morning, and he indicated to me that he had not received any amendments. And the bill has been before law amendments for quite a considerable period of time. We were prepared at this stage, to look at some amendments. However, when the Legislative Council indicated to me this morning that he had not received those amendments, felt that it was appropriate to proceed at this stage.
Honourable Member from Richmond.
Madam Chair, thank you. And I'm wondering if the Government House Leader would be willing to entertain a short recess so that we can have discussions on this matter rather than continue discussions on the Act for a prolonged period of time.
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Madam Chair, perhaps we could stand this bill for the moment and proceed, and the honourable member could have a discussion with the Minister of Health and proceed with that. So, Madam Chair, I move that we stand Bill number 26, the Health Protection Act.
Shall the bill stand? The Honourable House Leader? Oh, sorry. The Honourable Member from Halifax Clayton Park on introduction.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I did want to ask the House's forbearance while we introduce some visitors to the gallery. In the West Gallery, we have visitors from the Maritime Muslim Academy here in Halifax. And there are 10 students, aged 12 to 15, the junior high grades. And they're accompanied by their principal, whose name is Hadi Salah, and their teachers, Shaheen Hamza and Helena Yaqub, Masuman Shaha, and Stella Hajanor. And I wonder if the visitors would stand. We'd like to give you a welcome to the House. Thank you very much.
Certainly the House welcomes all of our visitors today and hope that they have an interesting time watching the proceedings. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 46, the Public Service Act?
Bill number 46, Public Service Act. Shall the clause carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 48, the Education Act?
Bill number 48, the Education Act. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Madam Chair, there was a slight amendment to that which was agreed to by the parties, and the Council, Legislative Council has that. I can do it orally. I don't have a handout on it because it's simply the insertion of 2 words, if that's okay with people. Do you have it?
Yeah. We have the bill as amended.
You have the bill as amended?
Yes. I understand. Is that the question?
Yeah. Yeah. It was the insertion of a word, Kevin. Yeah. Yeah, it was supposed to have been done. Yeah. You have it? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, yeah, as amended by law amendments, the bill and what it reads now, Madam Chair, is School board should make school facilities available free of charge to community youth groups or other groups, including senior citizens groups. And is the insertion of senior citizens groups. And with that,
Madam Chair, when the bill came back from Laura Amendment yesterday, it was introduced back into the chamber as an amended bill.
don't do anything. Okay.
Shall the clause carry? Shall the clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The Honourable Deputy Premier. Bill 61, Theatres and Amusements Act. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Madam Chair. No, I was the honourable member for Dartmouth North, I believe, had an interjection, but however, I am advised now that that is not there. So, Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 61, the Theatres and Amusements Act?
Question? Oh, sorry. Shall the clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Madam Chair, I move that your committee do now rise and report these bills.
I tells you. Good job, buddy. Coming 2 weeks' time. Rod? Government House Leader, will recognize the Government House Leader.
Speaker, for the information of members, Bill number 26, which is the Health Protection Act, which is in committee, we will return to that act, Mr. Speaker, after we have dealt with a couple of bills for second reading, and we have two bills on the order paper, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 79?
Get the report back.
Oh, you haven't done that yet? No.
The Chairman of Law Amendments
reports on bills reports that the committee has met and considered three bills, namely bills 46, 48, and 61. The chairman's been instructed to recommend them to favorable consideration of the House without amendment. Ordered these bills be read a third time.
Order these bills be read a third time. Bills 46, 48, and 61. Is it agreed? It's agreed. The Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, now would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 79, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act?
Bill number 79, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move Bill number 79, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act. Before I do that, I want to say that take this opportunity to convey to members of the House that this piece of legislation will enable government to act and provide consumers with a level of certainty and protection with respect to fuel pricing. It'll also provide us an opportunity after the Select Committee meets to determine the best course of action for Nova Scotians. It's something Nova Scotians have been asking me as Minister and us as government to do for a number of months, and I'm pleased to move Bill number 79.
The motion is for the moving of Bill number 79. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to spend a few minutes, certainly not the full hour that's available to me, but a few minutes anyway, addressing this bill that was introduced by the government just yesterday, the Act respecting the price of petroleum products. There are some things that need to be said today, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my caucus. First of all, I think it's important that everybody realize that even though we're in the midst of what you might call a gasoline price crisis, this bill extends to more than just gasoline for private passenger vehicles. It applies, I won't read the definition of petroleum product here, but if I could summarize, Mr. Speaker, this bill applies to any fuel used for heat, a very, very important issue. Of course, since Nova Scotia, unlike many other provinces, has about 2/3 of its homes heated by petroleum products. Almost 2/3 of homes heated by petroleum products, Mr. Speaker. And so the price of heating fuel is of very, very fundamental importance to the people of Nova Scotia. And this bill applies to that issue. And I think it's extremely important that before we have a crisis with home heating fuel prices next winter, that we get the problem solved now. We have a chance. We're in the middle of a gasoline price crisis, Mr. Speaker. We are not in the middle of a home heating fuel crisis because we are at the end of the winter heating season. And we have a number of months before the next home heating season is upon us. And we have a real opportunity here to do the right thing and head off the problem before it even arises. And so I do want to make clear to all members and to the people we represent that this bill applies to home heating fuel as well. And then, of course, it applies to any petroleum product used primarily for internal combustion engines or something that I'm not a mechanical person, Mr. Speaker, and I have to admit that there's something in the Act here that I don't even know what it is. I'm sure I'll be enlightened over the course of the next few months. A glow plug ignition system. The minister tells me that he can inform us what it is, but it's any fuel used in an internal combustion engine and any fuel used in a glow plug ignition system. I'm told that's simply the description of an engine that runs on diesel fuel. See how easy it was to educate myself, Mr. Speaker? Apparently, a number of members around me are more mechanically inclined than I am. So it's any fuel used in an internal combustion engine or in a diesel engine, Mr. Speaker. Now, the thing that I particularly wanted to underline in my remarks on second reading today, Mr. Speaker, is the enormous difference between what the government announced yesterday and what is actually in the bill. The government news release is very different from the bill. And today, the media dutifully reported what was in the government news release, but they didn't report what was in the bill. Because what was in the government news release is nowhere to be found in the bill. And that's a bit peculiar, Mr. Speaker, that's a bit peculiar. In fact, I was watching Peter Mansbridge on the CBC News last night, the 10 o'clock national news, and he went beyond misreporting the bill. What he reported to a waiting national audience was that the Nova Scotia legislature had passed the bill already, Mr. Speaker. So I do think that people who are reporting on this issue need to be a little bit more careful about what they're actually saying. Because the centerpiece of the government's announcement yesterday was 48 hours notice. 48 hours notice of a price increase. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it would surprise you to learn that that is not in the bill that's before us today. It's not there. Because what this bill is a broadly empowering piece of legislation that gives the government the power to do all kinds of things by regulation. By regulation. And you go section by section in the Act and it says this may be done by regulation, that may be done by regulation, this may be prescribed, that may be prescribed, and if it is prescribed, that's what you do. But no one reading this bill would actually have any idea what the government's policy is on petroleum product pricing. And in particular, the 48 hours notice is not in this bill. That is something that apparently the government is proposing to do by regulation. I say apparently because, as has become all too common in this legislature, the government has tabled a skeleton piece of legislation with no regulations attached, giving themselves the power to do all kinds of things by regulation. What's going to be in the regulation, Mr. Speaker? The members of this House have no idea, because the government hasn't told us. Does the government know what it wants to do by regulation? The only thing that they said yesterday was 48 hours notice. Now, Mr. Speaker, last night there was a commentator who I thought used a good line, and I'm going to use it again because it was such a good line, but since Ralph Klein is getting in trouble these days for not properly attributing his quotes, I think I better properly attribute them. This came from Marilla Stevenson of the Chronicle Herald as she spoke on CBC News last night. She said, and I thought it just captured exactly what this bill is, it is the least the government can do without doing nothing. The least the government can do without doing nothing. Now, and that's because really, when you get right down to it, all the government announced yesterday was the 48 hours notice. Now, notice, we'll have to wait and see if it's a good thing. Now, I do have to say, Mr. Speaker, that Dave Collins from Wilson Fuel, who's just about the only person who ever speaks from the industry side on this, because he represents an independent fuel company, or an ostensibly independent fuel company. The big players, big oil, they refuse to talk about this. And so the media have one talker and one talker only, and that's Dave Collins. And I like Mr. Collins. He's a good person. He helps to, I think, educate the public about what's going on out there. And he's a voice of some reason and some knowledge, which we can all benefit from. But yesterday, he didn't really pull out the stops. He was about as colorful as he could possibly be. He said, whoever dreamed this up is living proof that there are living brain donors, which I didn't think was very kind. He said it was bizarre. I think he used the word stupid. I'm not saying it's stupid, Mr. Speaker, because that would be unparliamentary. I'm simply quoting what Mr. Collins was quoted: stupid, bizarre, proof of a living brain donor. So Mr. Collins clearly doesn't think that this is going to do it. Now, we have to say that we're going to have to see how this works. Let's just say that Mr. Collins is highly skeptical that it will work, but it hasn't been tried before, and we have to wait and see. We have to wait and see. We can't just say right off the bat, it's not going to work, it can't work, it's going to make things worse. We're going to have to wait and see, because if you're going to give the government a tiny little bit of credit for the baby step that it took yesterday, it's that this government is the first provincial government in Canada to do something, to take a step. And that's a good thing, Mr. Speaker. The government should be congratulated for that. Whether it's enough.
Excuse me, would the member agree to leave some time for an introduction?
Of course, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaver Bank on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to apologize to my group from the Holland Road School for not meeting them and greeting them when they came in, but I was in law amendments across the hall. For those of you here in the East Gallery, I have a group of students from the Holland Road School, accompanied by Brenda Greencorn, Brad Murray, Beth Benjamin, Darlene Burgess, Elaine Johnson, Marika Latham, and Yvonne Gordon, and I would like those to stand and be recognized by this legislature for their attendance today, and I thank them.
Thank you. Welcome to all the members viewing the legislature today. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was saying before we welcome our guest today that the government should be congratulated for taking a step, for recognizing that sitting on the sidelines is not a good option. Whether the step they took yesterday is enough is something that we'll have to wait and see. And we'll know fairly soon, I would say, Mr. Speaker. We'll know very soon, as soon as this legislation is passed, whether it's going to benefit Nova Scotia consumers. I was saying that this legislation is broad enabling legislation, leaving everything, including the 48 hours, to be filled in later. There's a lot of blanks here to be filled in, and it looks like that the second piece of the government's plan, the select committee of this legislature, is the body that is going to be charged principally with filling in those blanks. And Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of questions about the select committee, how it could work, how it might work. I don't want to see it set up to fail. But I worry, Mr. Speaker, about whether the select committee is the best method to address this kind of problem, because there's no question that on some level, this is a very technical, complex problem. The members of the committee are going to have to deal with some very complicated factual, financial, economic information, and they're going to be able to have to work with that information, digest it, understand what it means, and then be able to make choices on behalf of Nova Scotia consumers. If this committee is going to work, it's going to need to be properly resourced, Mr. Speaker, because if it is not, it will be the captive of the experts. It will be the captive of people who know the industry inside out already. Mr. Speaker, this committee is going to have the resources to, for example, hire its own independent expert help to help the members wade through the undoubted difficulties of this issue, because this is more than just traveling around the province and listening to people complain about high gas prices. Okay, there's going to be a lot more to the work of this select committee than that. We need members on that committee who are going to roll up their sleeves and be prepared to get to work. And, Mr. Speaker, if I may use a cliche, put their partisan differences aside, put their preconceived ideas aside about what to do, because it seems clear that no one person, no one party, no one stakeholder in the industry has got the answer about what to do, because if the answer was clear, it would already have been done. And our responsibilities as members of this legislature is to make sure that that committee is set up in such a way that if there is an answer, if there is a way to defend the interests of Nova Scotia consumers, that committee will find it.
Excuse me, I wonder if the member would agree to yielding some of his time for still another introduction.
Of course I would, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognize the leader of the NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to introduce in the West Gallery participants in the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union Political Lobby Workshop. They're, of course, learning more about the political process and lobbying over the next couple of days, and I understand that they're here this morning to meet with MLAs and going to be meeting with caucus office representatives this afternoon. And I just especially note Ian Johnson, who is not, of course, unknown to this House, having served in our caucus office at one point and is here often on various matters of concern to the NSGEU and, of course, to the people of Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend a warm welcome.
Indeed, a welcome to the members from NSGEU, and we are debating Bill 79 today, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act, for your enjoyment. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if our guests want to take a case study on lobbying, this would be a great issue to do it, because there's a lot of money at stake here. A lot of money flows. In fact, Mr. Collins, who I just finished quoting in the paper, says another thing in the paper today, which is that none of the big oil companies want to take the risk of launching a price war here in Halifax. And what's the reason that Mr. Collins offers for that? It's because they've got too much money to lose. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've said before in the House, and I'll say again, that my parents don't live in Nova Scotia, they live in Winnipeg. Winnipeg is currently paying almost 20 cents a litre less than we do here. So I talk to my father regularly, and we talk, among other things, about gas prices. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? There has been a gas price war in Winnipeg for an extended period. And if you shop around enough and know what the different outlets are offering, you can get a good deal. And they're ready, willing, and able to undercut each other, Mr. Speaker. Round here in Halifax, it's all exactly the same price. You can go from one end of Metro to the other, from south to north, from west to east, and you're going to pay exactly the same price. And they say, don't interfere with us, we're a competitive industry, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, is baloney parliamentary?
I think.
Because, Mr. Speaker, that's baloney. That is baloney. And Mr. Collins says as much in the paper today. None of them wants to really compete with one another. Because, why, Mr. Speaker? Because they've got too much money to lose. And whose money is it? It's our money, the consumer's money. They want to take our money, as much of it as possible, and keep it. And if that means that they all kind of have a nudge, nudge, wink, wink attitude towards gas prices so that nobody will try and compete with somebody across the city, never mind down the street, well, they'll do that, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of money at stake here. I expect the members of the Select Committee to be subject to a full court press from the big oil companies, to bamboozle them at the very least, to misinform them at the worst, Mr. Speaker, because there's a great deal of money at stake. And one of the responsibilities of this Select Committee is to make sure that their process is as open and transparent as possible so that the consumers know that whatever answers come out the other end are done in the interests of the consumers and not in the interests of the big oil companies. Now, Mr. Speaker, having said that, nobody should be under any illusion that Nova Scotia can stand as an island isolated from world fuel prices. If fuel prices are going up around the world, then we have to pay those prices too. Nobody should be under any illusion that this government or any other government has the power to protect Nova Scotia consumers from a worldwide price. And if it's going up, as all the analysts predict, in the long term, over the next 10 years, it's heading nowhere but up. Okay, it's heading nowhere but up. We are all going to have to live with the consequences of that. We are all going to have more fuel-efficient cars. Because, Mr. Speaker, I've been fortunate enough over the course of my life to be able to travel fairly frequently, including to Europe. Because that's where my parents are from, so that's where all my relatives are. And one of the things I noticed, even as a little boy traveling to the United Kingdom, was that their cars were so much smaller than ours. And of course, with a little boy's curiosity, yes, and the Austin Mini came from Britain, and that's not an accident. Why, I would ask as a little boy, are their cars so different from ours? It's because their fuel prices always were and still are double, triple what we pay here. And they've all adjusted over there, and the main way that they've adjusted is by driving much, much smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. And we're going to have to do the same thing with our homes, Mr. Speaker. We're going to have to find ways of making our homes more energy efficient. Mr. Speaker, there's all kinds of things that we need to do. Nova Scotia consumers should not be under the illusion, with this bill or without this bill, with or without a Select Committee, that the price of fuel, heating fuel or motor fuel, is going to go down. Because what we're committing to Nova Scotia consumers today is not a low price. We can't do that. The price is what the price is. What we are committing to Nova Scotia consumers is that we will do everything in our power to get for them a fair price, so that there are not undue profits being reaped by anyone, so that Nova Scotia consumers know that they are paying what they should pay, and not 1/10 of 1 penny more.
Hear, hear.
This select committee is going to have to, as I said, Mr. Speaker, go into this with an open mind. We've suggested things in the past. The Liberal Party has suggested things in the past. The Conservative Party has, well, they haven't really suggested anything in the past, Mr. Speaker, until recently. They've been the free market crowd over there, Mr. Speaker, until the beautiful member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley sort of broke ranks and said, no, it's time to act. It's time to act. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? What's worried me is that's not the only issue that that member and I have agreed on in the last couple of weeks. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, now the government side. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I could get a little less heckling from my own side here.
Order. The member for Halifax Fairview is speaking to the beautiful member from Musquodoboit.
So, Mr. Speaker, the government, the Conservative caucus, has come on board, acknowledging that staying on the sidelines is not an option. Now, we're going to have to lay aside what we've said before. We're going to have to go into it with an open mind, and it may turn out at the end of the select committee process that we were right all along. Or it may turn out we were wrong. And if we are, we have to acknowledge that, and so does the Liberal caucus. They have their own ideas. I don't agree with their ideas. They don't agree with ours. But if it turns out that they're right all along, then we all have to acknowledge that at the end of this process. And if it turns out they're wrong, they're going to have to acknowledge that as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I know our caucus is ready to go into the select committee process with an open mind, knowing that what we're trying to achieve is the fairest price possible for the people that we all serve. And I know that the members from all the other caucuses will be going in with the same attitude. Because we do have to learn from everybody. I would certainly accede to an introduction.
Yielding some time for an introduction. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. In the Speaker's gallery is the CEO, Brian Smith, from Kings Municipal Council, and John Fuller, a councillor from the area representing the area near Wolfville. They're here to present on Bill 40, have some strong concerns about it, and they'll be in the Red Room making their presentation. And I hope the House will give them a very warm welcome. Ask them to stand.
Thank you, member. And the honourable member for Halifax Fairview will attempt to allow you to finish your dissertation without interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members will be pleased to hear that I'm almost done. Mr. Speaker, the Bill 80 that the Leader of the Opposition introduced in the House yesterday is part of the answer. And that has to do with fair dealing between branded dealers and dealers who are not part of a network. We have to make sure that not only that the price at the pump is fair for Nova Scotia consumers, but also that the way that the big oil companies treat their dealers is fair. Because every step in the production and distribution and retail process has an impact on price. And we're going to have to look at every step of that. So I know that the Select Committee will look at Bill 80 and the proposal that's in there because it seems surely to be part of the solution. Mr. Speaker, even though I personally don't agree with it, based on what I know now, this committee is going to have to look seriously at the Liberal Party proposal that part of the answer here is to cut the gas tax. Now that has implications. That has implications for the provincial budget. If you're going to give away your revenue, you have to also be prepared to stand up and say which services you want to cut. Or alternatively, where you're going to make up the revenue, which other tax you're going to increase. You can't have it both ways. You can't cut your revenue and then pretend to the people of Nova Scotia that nothing else is going to change. But if that's the answer, if the tax levels on gas are too high, then that's something the Select Committee has to look at seriously. I would note in passing, Mr. Speaker, that the federal Liberal government has entirely rejected the notion that federal gas taxes should be cut. The Federal Minister of Finance has said that is not one of the options on the table. I would also note in passing that cutting gas taxes, provincial gas taxes, is something tried by the former Liberal government of New Brunswick. And everybody acknowledges that it didn't work. It did not work. All that it did, in effect, was take that government revenue and put it in the pockets of the oil companies. That's what it did. And we have to frankly acknowledge that. Now, I know the member for Richmond has been quoted as saying that adverse consequence can be avoided. And I do hope that the Select Committee will look seriously at that proposal to see if that can in fact be done. I personally believe that the more fruitful thing to look at is HST, because that is the tax that, since it's a percentage tax, when prices spike, the government gets a great deal extra revenue, whereas the other tax is a flat per liter tax, so that the government doesn't get any more revenue from the flat gas tax when the price goes up. What it does get is windfall HST revenue. When I say windfall, what I mean is it's revenue for which the government did not budget. Because let's never forget that one of the major reasons why the government was able to balance its budget last year, or I should say apparently balance its budget, because the public accounts aren't in yet and won't be for a while, Mr. Speaker, the only reason they were able to apparently balance their budget, that's not fair. Let me go back to what I said first. It's not the only reason. A major reason was because they reaped windfall revenue from the tax on insurance premiums. When car insurance rates went through the roof, the government happily collected the percentage tax that is imposed on insurance premiums. So there's no question this government's bottom line benefited substantially from skyrocketing car insurance. And there's also no question that the government treasury stands to benefit substantially, to the tune of many millions of dollars, because of HST on fuel. If the price goes through the roof, so do government revenues. And we're going to have to confront that fact and deal with it and see if that's really where we want to go, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has made what, in my estimation, is an excellent suggestion, and that is that the windfall revenue should be put aside as a fund to help with what could otherwise be the home heating fuel crisis this coming winter. That's where the money should come from, Mr. Speaker, to fund that program. It's a good suggestion, but every day that ticks by without us doing that is lost revenue and a lesser chance for a program like that working. Now, that's where I stand today, Mr. Speaker, but I would say again, the Select Committee needs to look at these ideas seriously and see if that's the way to go. We need to learn from the other regulated and unregulated jurisdictions. We hear many things about Prince Edward Island, which is a regulated system. Does it work? Does it not work? Has it led to higher prices? Has it not led to higher prices? We do know that they're paying a lower price than we are now, a lower pump price, but what the Select Committee is going to have to delve into with an open mind is whether that's because of regulation or despite regulation. And I would suggest the committee should also look at Newfoundland and any other jurisdiction anywhere that has ideas about how to make sure that consumers get a fair price at the pump. That's what we're all after, Mr. Speaker. That's what we all want, so let's see if the committee can actually do that. In closing, Mr. Speaker, let me just say that we should be under no illusion about what this piece of legislation is or what it does. It's a blank slate. It is a blank slate. It doesn't even include the 48-hour notice provision that the minister talked about yesterday. And it's up to all of us, since we've all signed on to this Select Committee, it's up to all of us to decide what will be written on that blank slate, but we must never forget our objective, which is to make sure that all of us, you, Mr. Speaker, me, everybody here, everybody we represent, pays nothing but a fair price and not 1/10 of 1 cent more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to make a number of remarks on Bill number 79, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act. Speaker, this province has seen hikes in gas prices over the last number of years, but clearly nothing like what we are seeing currently today. Back in January, it was clear that prices were once again on the rise, and it was at that time that the Premier of the province stated that his government would be looking at taking concrete action to provide relief to Nova Scotians from these high gas prices. Since January, Nova Scotia consumers have waited patiently or impatiently for relief from this government that told them they did not believe that we were paying a fair price at the pumps and that they would be prepared to take action. So we waited January, February, March, April, right into May. And then last week, the minister, during his estimates and here in the House, continued to say, wait for our plan. The Premier said, wait for our plan. So it's with great anticipation that Nova Scotians watch to see what was the Tory plan to bring immediate relief to Nova Scotian consumers on gas prices, to bring immediate relief to Nova Scotia truck drivers who try to make a living and rely on fuel as part of that living, taxi drivers, couriers, school buses, mums and dads bringing their children to after-school activities, and Nova Scotians trying to get to work. What would be the Tory plan that they've waited 3 months for? And then, Mr. Speaker, with great disappointment, we see Bill 79. What would Bill 79 do to bring immediate relief to Nova Scotian consumers when prices are now 96.9 cents for self-serve at the pumps? I'm told over $1 a litre for self-serve in Cape Breton. Absolutely nothing. Even the member from Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley said that he was disappointed to see that immediate relief would not be coming. And I have no doubt when all Tory members go to their ridings this weekend, they will be asked, is that the best you could do? I know the member from Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley's answer will be no. Even I am disappointed in what the government has done. 3 months waiting for a plan which is no plan at all. Speaker, we listened to the minister indicate that the major plank in this bill was, and it says in the press release, that the Petroleum Products Pricing Act will require 48 hours notice of any increase in price. Once the minister finally tabled the bill in this House, and I had the opportunity to go through the bill, I indicated to the minister, your press release is incorrect, because your bill does not require 48 hours notice. Your bill requires a notice to be set by regulation. So we're being asked to support a bill, again, that's going to be left to government regulations. Allow me to state right now, Mr. Speaker, that there's the first fatal flaw in this bill that must be immediately addressed, and I certainly hope that with the support of the NDP caucus that we will put that in the Act, not in the regulations, as per the minister's own press release to Nova Scotians. I'm sure it certainly would not have been the intent of the minister or his government to mislead Nova Scotians, but clearly, if they are serious about this, it must be at least placed in the Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, last night we all watched to see what the reaction was from consumers, what the reaction was from industry. And when you hear the comments from Dave Collins, one of the only industry representatives ever willing to talk to the media in good times and bad times, when everyone else refused to speak, he would speak. I would say that Mr. Collins has been able to educate Nova Scotians more on issues of fuel price than probably any other individual in the last number of years. He's at least given us an idea of what the market forces are, what companies are faced with, and I believe the fact that he's an independent operator gives him even that much more credibility with Nova Scotians. To believe that someone such as Dave Collins, which clearly from his reaction would have had absolutely no input in this legislation, would not even have been called by this government to see what would his suggestions be, being he's been very clearly someone who was willing to speak out and to be able to try to inform the public on issues dealing with gas prices. The fact that someone like that wasn't even consulted, or obviously was not even aware of what the government's plans were, I think it's just incredible to believe that the government since January would come forward with a plan that they hadn't even discussed, obviously, with industry representatives. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Collins even raised a legal argument, questioning the legality of the bill and saying that it would violate federal legislation dealing with competition and trying to prevent collusion amongst fuel companies. Now that the provincial government wants them to post 2 days in advance, or we're assuming it's 2 days, it's not in the Act, as I've said, we can only go by the minister's own comments, but requiring them to post 2 days in advance what the increase will be. Well, Speaker, we're then told by the minister that anytime there's going to be an increase, companies will have to contact his department and justify the increase. Well, that sounds like it's pretty, a pretty solid system. So the media asked the minister, well, what criteria will you be using to determine whether it's justified? Well, we haven't determined that yet, was the answer. Then they asked, if you do decide it's not justified, then what action will you take? And the answer was, the Act would allow us to explore taking further action down the road. What does that do for Nova Scotia consumers today, May 14th, 2004, that are looking for immediate relief? Absolutely nothing. This bill is a tremendous disappointment, is what it does. It's ironic, Mr. Speaker. I think when you look at the Daily News and you look at their editorial cartoon today, it appears to say everything. When you look at the cartoon they have, it shows before the provincial intervention, it shows gas prices, regular plus super, and says after provincial intervention, shows the gas prices with a little sign below it. It says, warning, you're about to get. And I think Nova Scotians who get the Daily News can see exactly what it says, but it's not a very flattering statement. It is a word used to describe an unfortunate act that will be done to Nova Scotians, which at the end of the day will cost them more money. Let us go a bit further in the Act. It says that gas stations must post what the increase will be 48 hours before it goes through. Where are they going to post it? Are we going to see the roadside price that says today's price, then 2 days from now's price? Is that what it's going to be? Do you have to go inside the service station to see where this is posted? Because obviously many of the service stations throughout the province now, you can pay with your debit or your Visa right at the pump. You never have to walk into a service station. Will it be right on the pumps itself? Here's what the price will be 2 days from now. Where will this be posted? Will it have to be on each and every pump? Because the pumps, most of them, you can get gas from either side. Or will it be roadside advertisements that fuel stations, mostly run by independents, will have to put new road signs up to announce what it's going to be in 2 days? This is not a solution. It's not even near a solution. And I'm going to use the same words as was used by the finance critic for the NDP, Marilla Stevenson, last night, in saying this was the least the government could do without doing anything. And that sums it all up, and I think the member from Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley himself recognizes that that is the case. Truck drivers in this province are not going to see relief under this government's plan. And now to be told you have to wait for a select committee to report, I believe it's now been moved to August 31st rather than August 1st. So you need to go another 3 or 4 months, continue to pay these exorbitant prices for gas, and this government's going to sit and not take concrete action. That is extremely unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. More importantly, what's even more frustrating for our caucus is had the government said they were going to strike the select committee in January, it would be prepared to report now, and the government could take concrete action now instead of this government spending 3 months to come forward and say we should have a select committee that will report in another 3 or 4 months. All along, truck drivers pay more, school bus drivers, couriers, taxi companies, and Nova Scotia families. They are not going to see any relief from this. Mr. Speaker, I must say, it was with great disappointment that I listened to the reaction from the leader of the NDP. It's true that this is an issue that is not going to be solved overnight. It's frustrating. It takes everyone working together. But our role as an opposition is to be there to hold the government accountable and to be there to tell the government when Nova Scotians are clearly telling us it's not good enough and we expect better. But how disappointing when you read in the Daily News today the headline, stupid, pointless, illegal. It goes on to talk about the plan, Nova Scotians' reaction, which clearly was not very favorable, and then to look at the end where it says NDP leader Darrell Dexter said he liked the legislation. Well, that's extremely unfortunate. It was very frustrating. You know, during one of the press scrums I did yesterday with the French media, I was told, well, what are you going to do about this bill? Because clearly the NDP are supporting the government. It was clear from the leader's comments that they were going to support the government. They liked the legislation. And then we listened to the mayor from Halifax Fairview, who tore the legislation pretty much apart after his leader said that he supported it. What we have said, Mr. Speaker, and let me explain it. I know the mayor from Halifax Fairview made reference to it, and let me explain it even better. It is clear that with higher prices through HST revenues, the government brings in more money. It brings in more money than what the government anticipated as part of its budgetary process. That is extra revenue not anticipated by the government. He gave the example of the money the government got through rising insurance rates, which it clearly hadn't anticipated, or at least no one yet has been able to prove where they either anticipated it or felt it was going to take place. But that was extra revenue they received there. What we have said as a Liberal caucus in an effort to try to bring immediate relief to Nova Scotians is to say, as a result of the extra revenue you're getting in HST, it's an opportunity to either freeze or rescind the 2 cent a litre increase imposed by this Tory government after they told Nova Scotians in 1999 there would be no increase in taxes under the John Ham government. It's simple. It's a way, I'm sure the Finance Department can figure out how much additional revenue is coming in and use that to suspend the 2 cent a litre until it balances itself out. That is the way of doing it. And when I hear the mayor from Halifax Fairview say that the Liberal plan would result in a reduction in services, that is completely misleading and incorrect. He himself has admitted that high prices bring in a windfall of revenue to HST that the government had not anticipated. They have thrown around figures as to how much additional revenue this would bring, which would make it even easier for the government to then say we can suspend or cancel that 2 cent a litre increase because of the windfall we are getting through HST until such time as it balances itself back out, which would give immediate relief to Nova Scotia drivers, which is what they have asked all elected members to do. It is a reasonable proposal, and what we have said, and it saddens me to hear the NDP repeating the government line of what happened in New Brunswick. What happened in New Brunswick, the government withdrew an increase they had on tax and then had nothing to enforce it afterwards. What we have clearly said is that we can either freeze or suspend that 2 cent a litre increase and give a role to the UARB to ensure that the industry doesn't just swallow it up. So there is a way of using a regulatory body already in existence in this province to force fuel companies to justify the price they're bringing in. And I would tell you, Mr. Speaker, as a member of this legislature, I have a great deal more faith in the ability of the UARB to hold the fuel company's feet to the fire than the minister's office, because clearly the minister's office is not in a position to say whether an increase is justified or not justified, and I don't think any Nova Scotians would expect the minister's office to have that capacity and to be prepared to do that. So there is a way of doing this. We have presented a concrete idea that the government has refused to act upon because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, higher prices mean higher revenues for this government. It means more of an ability to try to balance their budget at the end of the day. When we called upon the Minister of Finance to take action against higher insurance rates, they looked the other way. Why did they look the other way? Because higher insurance rates meant higher revenue for the government, which gave him more of an opportunity to try to claim he had a balanced budget when we all knew it was not the case. The government looked the other way.
And what this bill is doing is a way of the government looking the other way by doing absolutely nothing other than saying we are going to give you 2 days' notice of higher prices coming in. So they can say we at least tried something, but in reality, as was said by Marilla Stevenson, as has been said, repeated by the NDP finance critic, nothing concretely has been done to help Nova Scotians. We are left now with a select committee which will be left to try to determine what is the best option for Nova Scotians. It's going to be extremely difficult for this committee. I remember I sat on the Workers' Compensation Review Committee and remembered how challenging that was. Mr. Speaker, you were on that committee also. You remember that committee. It was an extremely difficult committee, very technical pieces of legislation, medical information that was in there, trying to put together formulas that would work, figures being thrown at you at every turn. It was extremely, extremely frustrating, and it took a great deal of the members of that committee's time, not only between travel, the correspondence, the amount of documents presented. I submit to you that the members of this committee are facing a similar fate. It's going to be extremely difficult. And Mr. Speaker, I've said already to the Minister that I look forward to see who will be chosen as the chair of that committee, which will send a clear signal whether the government is interested in taking action on this seriously. I can remind you, Mr. Chairman, you'll be well aware that in 1998, when we were in government under a minority situation, the chair of that select committee was the current Minister of Justice, who sat as a member of the Tory caucus in third place. That is who chaired that committee. Just as a reminder to the Minister and others who may not have been here during that time, I know the Minister of Education was here, as he smiles now, being recalled as to what the situation was there. I think Nova Scotians would expect that the same principles that were applied in the decision of who would chair back in '98 for that committee would be applied in this case also, to make sure that the committee does its job and does report and does bring Nova Scotians solutions. One of the unfortunate things yesterday is when the Minister was asked, will you adopt the recommendations of the Select Committee and take action on what they have said? Will you give us that guarantee, Minister? And the Minister, as expected, did a little song and dance all around it and completely refused to commit that he would adopt the final recommendations of this all-party committee, which leads Nova Scotians to question, is the government sincere by appointing this committee, or is this a way to try to appease Nova Scotians, which I think they can clearly tell from today's media, and which I believe they'll see in the days and weeks ahead, has been a complete failure on their behalf. It will not quell the anger in this province, because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we can talk about big oil companies all we want. When you go to the pumps, there's that little sticker there with that little graph, that little pie chart. And that little pie chart there tells you where your price of gas is coming from. And we all know where it breaks down. Mr. Speaker, as an elected member of this legislature, I cannot change what is done in Ottawa. But we can certainly work towards addressing what is done by this province and by this government. This government campaigned on no increase in taxes, turned around in 2002 and put a 2 cent a litre increase, came out of the pockets of Nova Scotians. Now, as I've said before, 2 cents a litre doesn't sound like much. It really doesn't. What's 2 cents a litre? But when we looked at the budget books, when they came in 2003, how much revenue did that 2 cent a litre? It's only 2 cents. How much did it bring in? $25 million out of the pockets of Nova Scotians is where that went. $25 million for a government that said it would not increase taxes. So does the government say, well, that $25 million has brought us where we need to be? We never intended to have that tax remain permanent. We're going to now remove it? Not at all, Mr. Speaker. Let's go one more year. 2003 to 2004, if I'm not mistaken, the Minister of Finance can correct me, I believe the figure is $22 or $23 million was brought in by that 2 cent a litre increase. Almost $50 million has left, I should say, the pockets of Nova Scotians in the last 2 years because of that increase. And when I hear the leader of the NDP, who has campaigned on a better deal for Nova Scotia families, say that Bill number 79 is good legislation, I find it extremely disappointing. Not only did they shock Nova Scotians in propping up this government on their budget, but now to turn around and to say, a party that claims they want to put money back in the pockets of Nova Scotians would say that they like Bill 79, when the finance critic for their party has clearly said this will do nothing in the immediate or short term to help Nova Scotia families. It leaves Nova Scotians to wonder, truly, where is the NDP really going on this? And as I've said before, for the member from Halifax Fairview to suggest that our proposal would result in a reduction in services is misleading and completely incorrect. And it shows again the inability of the NDP to look outside the box and to try to come up with new proposals. Is our idea the solution? Maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. You know, maybe it isn't. Maybe time will tell. But I can at least stand and tell Nova Scotians that our caucus is responsible enough to at least put forward a proposal. The NDP have not done one, and the government clearly, who has all of the resources for the last 3 months to bring forward a relief, has failed to do so. They know themselves it is a farce to suggest giving 2 days' notice is going to bring relief to Nova Scotia drivers. They realize that. Well, one of the NDP members says it's better than nothing. Well, as Marilla Stevens said, it's the least the government could do without doing anything. So if that is what we are as legislators and as opposition members is prepared to say to a government, I think we have failed. Nova Scotians sent us here as a minority situation saying we want a strong opposition that will hold the government's feet to the fire, that will tell the government when it's not good enough and that we expect more, and we are going to do everything in our power to make that happen. And then to hear the official opposition say it's better than nothing. It has come down to better than nothing, whether it be the budget, whether it be gas prices, whether it be more to come. Better than nothing. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have put forward a proposal. If the member from Dartmouth North has a plan, let him present it. Let him stand on his feet and let him present it.
That's why you're the third party.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to him standing and talking about his days in government and the days of his party in government and how many solutions they brought to Nova Scotians. They certainly, we have a long ways to wait, and I'm sure with the NDP's actions we have much longer to wait before any of those days comes. That, I would tell you, Mr. Speaker, is immediate relief to Nova Scotians, not only today, but for the long term, Mr. Speaker, in that reality. But at the end of the day, it's not the official opposition to our government. It is not the Liberal caucus who are government. It is the Conservative Party that is government. Nova Scotians expect that they could bring forward a plan that would bring them immediate relief. As I've said, they have waited 3 long months of high prices, and then what do they get? They get Bill number 79. It's not good enough. The leader of the NDP knows it's not good enough. The member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley knows that it's not good enough. As Tory members return to their ridings, whether they're attending community functions, going to an event, or attending church services, they will hear from their constituents, is that the best you could do? And they know themselves, as the mayor from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley has clearly said, he expected more. He expected better. And I have no doubt that he's sincere in saying that, because he worked in an industry that relies so heavily on the price of fuel. Independent truckers that have such a small margin of profit to start off with, a busted tire, problems with your machine, and high gas prices can completely wipe out any margin you have. These are people with families. They're people with homes, with mortgages, and with many costs to incur. And what does this bring to them? Absolutely nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, today is giving 48 hours notice, which is not even in the Act, which was a misleading statement made in the government press release. It's not in the Act. But is 48 hours notice going to help Nova Scotia consumers? Is Bill 79 an answer to give Nova Scotians immediate relief? It clearly isn't. Could the government have done more? There is no doubt. Could the government be doing more now by sitting immediately with representatives of the parties now, rather than waiting for a select committee? Bring in Dave Collins, bring in industry reps, bring in consumer groups, Bring in whoever you have to as experts.